It's time to learn from the best of game devs. Tony Chan here, and welcome to episode 91 of Game Dev Loadout, where I chat with inspiring game developers every Wednesday morning to bring you the motivation and tactics for a successful gaming career. Now let's chat with today's feature guest, Kelly Wallick. Kelly, it is game time. Are you ready?
Yeah, I'm ready.
Let's do this. She is the founder of IndieMEGABOOth, which mission is to bring indie games to the forefront of the gaming community. So game devs go to this event to network with fans, colleagues, and even publishers. She also is a part of the IGF, which is Indie Games Festival chairman and co-organizer of BitSummit. So go ahead, Kelly, give us a bit about your personal life and how you got started in the game industry.
Yeah, so I've been running the Mega Booth. It was founded about a little over 6 years ago now. So our very first showcase was at PAX East in 2012. And I have been running it ever since. And the IGF chairmanship, this is going to be my third year running it. And this is the 20th annual Independent Games Festival. And it's held at GDC each year in San Francisco. So it's coming up in about 2 weeks. So we're getting close. PAX is about a month away, which PAX East and PAX West are pretty big shows that we do. Our two biggest shows probably that we do per year. And then as you mentioned, BitSummit is going to be May 12th and 13th this year, and that's in Kyoto in Japan. So a little bit of background information on me. So I've talked about this a bit, maybe in like articles and things, but I actually started off as a chemist. So I didn't work in video games at all, and my background is in the sciences. So that's what I went to school for, and that's what I worked at when I first got out of college. My very first job was I worked as an analytical chemist at a nanotechnology company.
Whoa.
So we were embedding silver nanoparticles into fabrics to help make them antimicrobial. So things like socks and wound care and bandages and things like that. So anytime that you see something that says like AG plus on it, that's kind of like around the same idea of what we were doing. And then the job that I had after that was I moved to Boston to work at MIT. I was managing a chemical engineering lab. It was mostly for undergraduates, but we also had some graduate students. We ran a professional course to teach people all about primarily using equipment for like pharmaceutical research and I guess it's like bioprocess engineering work. And so I worked there until, in a very kind of like superhero origin story, the lab actually kind of blew up.
How did it blow up?
A steam pipe exploded in the maintenance room next to the lab. It was actually pretty scary. It was not good. It destroyed all the equipment, because the steam condensed into water and it basically rained in the lab. Steam is also super dangerous. Like you can suffocate in it. And I mean, obviously the temperature is really hot. And yeah, so MIT's campus is all heated on steam pipes. And
were you there?
Maintenance. I had left like an hour before it happened.
Oh, wow.
So, yeah. And there were some grad students that were in one of the floors above us. So we were in a sub-basement and they thought a bomb had gone off because it was like an 8-inch steam pipe. And when those burst, like that's a pretty intense it's a pretty intense situation. And then they couldn't shut it off. It was basically like a maintenance test that had failed. There's like these flex joints that are supposed to absorb and like move when you're turning on and off the heat, because when you turn it off, it creates water. And then when you put the steam back on and the steam hits the water, it's called a water hammer effect. And so these flex joints are supposed to absorb that pressure and flex. And this one didn't, it broke instead. So it was a pretty like crazy situation. And so I worked in the lab for a little bit longer after that, but we were rebuilding the lab. We had to move to different buildings. Funding was getting shifted around. So then I started to work at a biofuel company that had been funding research in the lab while we were getting it started back up. So I worked there for about a year or so, and I helped them build their lab. And I was like one of their early employees. And we were doing ethanol research. And yeah, at some point, they started hiring like postdocs and they started hiring over me. And I don't know, like I had gone through like 2 startups and this job in academia, and I wasn't really sure if I was enjoying the career path. And it was really difficult to get ahead without going back, like not only just to grad school, but going through like PhD and a postdoc, which is a lot of time, a lot of money, a lot of schooling. And it was frustrating to me because I had been doing all this cool research and doing all this hands-on work, but I felt like I couldn't move up without like technically having these degrees, which to me kind of seemed like a waste of time and money to have to go back and like, academically relearn a bunch of stuff and just to be able to basically do what I was doing, except for at a higher pay rate. And so around that time, I had a friend who was working as a programmer, and she had wanted to start up a game studio. And I was like, well, what? Because I was thinking of starting my own company, like a biotech company. And she was like, yeah, I want to start a company also, except for like I want it to be video games. And so I was curious about how it worked. And Boston has a really tight-knit, very welcoming, like awesome gaming community. And so I started going to meetups and started getting to know people in the local community. And eventually I got a job at a company called Infrared 5, which was like basically a contract shop. I got hired as an administrative assistant. So I started off basically doing like secretarial work and then got trained to work as a project manager. And so I worked there for about 2 years. And during that time is when the concept of the Mega Booth was kind of like formed and the initial work was being done. And so I was still working there when I was first running the Mega Booth for the first like year or so, which is one of the better pieces of advice I have for people. Someone gave me this advice, is basically don't just like quit your job and just start up your own thing like in a new industry, it's better to get a job in the industry and do what you're passionate about on the side and learn at the same time. So then that way you have a way to like, first off, to pay your bills. You also have somebody like that you can get on the job experience with. So I've learned a ton from the woman who runs the company there, like a lot of stuff that I know now about like how game development works and software development works and contract negotiations and all those things are stuff that I learned on the job by people who already knew how to do this kind of stuff. And then at some point, it just kind of became a matter of like my side job was taking up more time than my day job. It was like I couldn't really do both at the same time. And so I was like, I've always wanted to start a company, and it's pretty much not like a now or never, but it felt like if I'm going to do it, like what better time is there going to be? So about like 4 years or so ago, then I quit that job and then started up the Mega Booth as its own full-on company. And I've been running it ever since. So it's been fully self-sustainable. We bootstrapped ourselves. We've always been a really small, lean team. So there's not a lot of people that actually work on this behind the scenes. I think now that we've gone on and we've done more stuff, I think sometimes people are like, there's either two things where they're like, so is this enough work that you do it as a full-time thing? And I'm like, oh my God, yes. Like it's so much work. Or they think that we're like huge, like we're this giant like events company that just like have all these money and resources and people. But right now we're two full-time people and one like almost full-time person. And then we have a couple people on as contractors. So we're maybe like 5 or 6 people at any given time. And so the amount of work that we do per year, like at this point, we're doing a show maybe every like 2 months or so. And we have submissions about every 6 months. And we're pretty much at max capacity, I'd say, for like the amount of stuff that we can do. But we're always looking for ways to grow. And like we have some exciting stuff that we're working on for this upcoming year, which we haven't totally announced yet. And then last year we had started the mega shows, which are our own standalone events. And those are focused more on it's like music, games, and art. So it's a bit more like a party at an arcade, essentially, is the idea behind it. And we're hoping to do some more of those this year as well, too, and should be announcing that stuff coming up. I think maybe I rambled on a little bit, but that's kind of
that's awesome.
The long sordid history of how I got into video games and how the Mega Booth started and, where I'm coming from with all this.
Yeah, so let's go ahead and talk about the indie game of Mega Booth. And like me, or any game developers in general, we should definitely go out there and network and showcase our game and just build a relationship with people. Like, what is something you want us to know about going to these type of events that we definitely should be doing?
Man, I actually give a whole talk on this. It's called like how to showcase your game like a pro. There's a couple of different things. I mean, so one of the benefits of working with someone like the Mega Booth is that we help to kind of guide you into the process and kind of show you the ropes of how these events work. They can be like a big event like PAX can be incredibly overwhelming if you're a small team and you don't have experience going to a convention before. There's lots of stuff like how do you order carpet padding and where does electricity come from and what are the early bird pricing deadlines. And like, if you ship something to the event, is it going to cost you an arm and a leg because a union person has to like pick it up and carry it to your booth space? And so we help to kind of make sure that all of these weird little things that you'd never think of are actually going to happen. And then on top of the fact that they are actually going to happen, we help you to do it in a way that's really cost effective. So to kind of like keep you from making very expensive mistakes in the process. But there's also like ways that you can do this stuff pretty cheaply or get what you want out of a show. I think sometimes people think that like applying to the mega booth or going to something like PAX is like the very first thing that you have to do. And this is your like golden ticket to getting your game noticed and making a bunch of money and getting a publisher. And really, like, you don't have to start off at a show that big. There's tons and tons of local events. There's lots of smaller things that are either free or they're very like cost effective. It can be a good way to kind of practice talking about your game and showing your game to other people. It could be a good way to like engage with your local community and start to meet people locally. Even the Mega Booth, started local. Like we primarily were doing things in Boston, involved in the Boston community before we expanded out into more stuff. So I think getting that experience and getting it on a small scale and getting some initial player feedback is really smart. And to do that a few times before you kind of dip your toes into going to something that has like, 150,000 or 200,000 people coming to it.
Yeah, you're right. Because you don't want to mess up your show or your big showcase, and you don't want to do it wrong. Like you definitely want to practice, because if you're going to spend a lot of money at a PAX or something or any game mega booth, you want to make it count. You want to make that showcase count. So I completely understand. What mistakes are most common, even at a pro level, that you see people make at these shows?
So one of my kind of like, I don't know if it's like a biggest mistake, but it's a little bit of like a pet peeve, is that I think the signage design, like, so the way that you like would design a logo and you imagine it like how it looks maybe on a web page or how it looks on Twitter or something is very different than how it's going to look in physically printed materials. And so sometimes like developers have like really cool logos or really neat ideas or like names for their game or something, and then they put them on a sign, and from far away you can't tell what is going on. Like you can't read it, you can't tell what the game is supposed to be about. This is also a really difficult situation with screenshots as well too. Like bigger companies will take like hundreds of thousands of screenshots of a game before they pick one that they put out to the press, and because you really need to encapsulate like, what are you doing in this game? What is the feel of it? What is happening on screen? And if something looks too chaotic, people will just look at it. They'll just glance at it and go, oh, I don't want to spend time figuring out what this means. And so it can kind of be the same thing with signage as well, too. So if your signage is really clear, very easy to read, and very visually appealing, it can be a very cheap way to make your booth stand out at something like this in a very cost-effective manner. Because like, if you think about it, like big companies can build like dinosaurs and, have like tons of people working at the booth and all this crazy stuff. But really all you have is like a table, your game, and some signage. The other really big thing is to invest in either renting or buying a very large TV. I've seen booths show at multiple shows, and like, if you have a small TV or you only have your computer monitor, like people will pass by it all the time. And so even though renting TVs at a show is expensive, it could be totally worth it because it will be eye-catching in the same way that really good signage can be eye-catching. And so what I've seen some people do, and this also works, is like, because renting them is so expensive, you could also just buy a really big TV. And like, if you have friends locally, just say like, hey, you can keep this TV at your house 362 days out of the year. And then when I'm at the show, like, you need to give me this TV back. Or you could raffle it off at the end, or, there's lots of ways to do it that's like more cost effective than just renting it. So I think like really good, visually appealing, easy to recognize and see signage from far away, and then also like very big TV and like some sort of visual on it are like the two kind of big, like, yeah, definitely don't skimp out on those.
So is there like a specific font or a specific type of way the letters are that just stands out?
So in the talk that I give, like, we have a couple examples, but like one company that has really good signage is Cappy for their game Below. So it's very minimalistic. It's basically just like a black background, and it says Below, and it has a little mountain on it. Arena Gods was another one that had a really like visually appealing thing. Another one, if you want to go a little overboard, was I Expect You to Die, which just was like if you look at their booth, like if you find pictures of their booth space at PAX, it was just like the name of the game was like in 100 places. So it's like you could definitely tell what the name of the game was and that game is at that booth. So I think it's a little more that than it is like you don't need to cram like every single thing about your game into a sign. You just need something that's going to, when people walk by it, they're going to stop and look and understand kind of what they're getting into. So like for something like Below, it's like mysterious and kind of cool looking. I Expect You to Die was more like kind of like fantastical, I don't know, like super spy, kind of like cheesy, like tongue in cheek kind of thing. And so if you can get that stuff across, and also to have really clear lettering that you can see from far away, like I said, the signage, like pop-up banners are like as tall as about like a person is and maybe 2 or 3 feet wide. And so imagining what that is going to look like without having ever made printed materials before is just something that I think gets lost in translation a lot of times when people are like going to their very first show. And once you make those banners, you can just, they collapse down and they come in like a little bag. And so you can just take them to like every show. So once you get it right, once you invest it, they're like $150 or something. So if you make like 2 or 3 of them, you can take them with you pretty much anywhere.
Oh, wow. Awesome advice. Thank you so much for that. Yeah. That should definitely help us getting those out. Now, let's take this on a more personal level. And yeah, you've seen all these games come through now, but I want to, talk about your career. You switched over from a chemist to working in the game industry. Like, what was the worst moment of your career? That one moment that's still vivid in your mind. Be very detailed and tell us that personal story.
Yeah, I was thinking about this a little bit. I mean, I don't think that there's any kind of like moment that was really like professionally just this kind of like horrible disaster where I'm like, oh man, like I wish that this never would have happened. I mean, we go through a lot of trouble to make sure that like experiences for people at shows are going to be successful. I would say it's honestly more like the personal pressure, I think, that comes along with doing this kind of work, or even like for indie developers in general. Like you're putting so much of your time and your effort and your emotions and your kind of like self-worth and like all these things into this like creative expression, and definitely like burning out and like reaching the kind of height of like pushing myself to a limit to a point where it's like unhealthy, or I'm kind of like feeling like I'm collapsing underneath the pressure, is definitely something that I think I struggle with more so than like a kind of professional mistake, like, or, like a big, like kind of professional failure in some ways. And to me, a lot more of the failures that have come about from the Mega Booth are from inaction and not so much from action. And that inaction comes from a place of a fear of failure and really being afraid to like make changes and put ourselves out there. And so doing the mega show last year, like that was something I've been wanting to get off the ground for like a year, and like I kept kind of spinning my wheels and I wasn't really sure if I wanted to do it. I was also really scared that like, what if we make this event and then like nobody comes to it? And in some ways it wasn't like, it didn't go 100%, like I'm a definite overachiever if you can't tell. And so like something not being 110% amazing is just like a total failure to me. And I think getting to a point where I could have realistic expectations and also take the weight of the fear of failure off of myself and actually get moving and make it happen, in some ways was really empowering and freeing and scary and horrible all at the same time. So I would say, honestly, it's like, it's a bit more of that, and like the balance of, how much pressure are you putting on yourself, and how much is your fear of not doing it right, or your fear of failing, or the fear of public judgment or public failure or something really holding you back on like what you're truly capable of. So I feel like that's kind of more where I skew on the kind of bad things, I guess.
Well, what finally made you take action? Like, what gave you that push, or what helped you along the way?
Honestly, like I had some kind of personal failures, I guess would be a good way to say it. We had some staff turnover. Like I felt like this like foundation and this kind of like stability that I had created for myself by not taking these risks was suddenly falling apart because of inaction, because we weren't moving things forward and because we were kind of like on this treadmill. And so once that started to happen, then I basically felt very panicked, where I was like, oh my God, if I don't do this, like it's never going to happen. Which in some ways was kind of true. In other ways it wasn't. And so I think that really, like, I basically got catapulted out of my comfort level by external situations that had cropped up because I had been putting things off for so long. I've also struggled with burnout a lot. Like I work a lot of crazy hours and I have a hard time having a work-life balance. I had a really difficult personal situation, kind of like a family emergency toward the end of last year that ate up a lot of time for me. And I had been very burnt out at the time. And I've been pushing really hard to like get the mega show stuff going, get these new things happening, build up a new team. And we got there, but I realized that I can't keep working like that, you know, and it really took a kind of like dramatic bottoming out for me to really like step back and be like, okay, like what am I trying to get out of this versus like what are the expectations that I feel like either other people are putting on me or that I'm making up that other people have about me or about the work, and how much am I truly capable of versus how much am I afraid of versus, you know, what's good for the community versus what's good for me, what's good for the team. And so I've been really working on that a lot over the last, like, I'd say like 5 or 6 months or so. And it's something that I talk about when I go and give talks. Like a lot of times, you know, I'm just basically like, get 8 hours of sleep, drink water, you know, like do these things that are taking care of yourself, because there's a lot of pressure, I think, to do this thing where like, you're always reacting, like you're on social media, you're like not really sleeping, you're answering emails at all hours of the night, your notifications are always on, you know, and like if you go at that pace for too long, you become just totally ineffective. And I think people forget that like we're still human, you know, like you still need to rest, you still need to eat, you still need to sleep, you still need to like drink water, you still need to like do fun things, to be creative and to like refill yourself kind of spiritually, I guess, in some way, to be able to do creative technical work, even though like it feels like you should just be able to keep going and going and going and going.
Oh my God. Yeah. Once again, game devs, do not burn yourself out. Take breaks, go out there, do something, just relax for a bit. Even if it's just like 10 minutes walking outside, it's going to be really helpful. What are bad recommendations do you hear in your profession?
Bad recommendations.
Yeah.
Ooh, I feel like, I don't know. I feel like I kind of hear a lot of those.
Give us the one that you just like, oh man, well, I can't believe you're saying that. Well, why are you telling this person this? Like, well,
yeah, I mean, I kind of think it goes around with the cost of making a game and how much like funding you ask for, I guess. I think there's a lot of kind of romanticism around the idea of like, I'm going to quit my job and I'm going to like, you know, be in my parents' house and I'm going to eat ramen and I'm going to make this game and it's going to cost me $10,000. And then, you know, even if you yourself individually are able to do something like that, but then the idea of like going around and telling other people that this is also how games should be made, I think is really destructive, because first off, like it's really unfair to just like, you know, assume that other people's circumstances either can afford something like that, you know, like maybe you don't have somebody who can support you financially or otherwise while you're like making this thing, or maybe like you have a family, or maybe you really just like don't want to eat ramen, you know, for 3 years or something while you're doing this. And I don't think it's really fair to like make people feel bad for not wanting to like sacrifice at this really extreme level. But then on the other hand, I think it also teaches consumers that games don't actually cost as much as they truly do cost to make. And a lot of Kickstarter campaigns kind of run into the same problem where, you know, people are asking for $50,000 for a game. And then you have like fans being like, why do you need this much money? When in reality, that game that you think costs $50,000, if you actually added up the true cost of it, is probably like $250,000.
Mm-hmm, yep.
Because you still need multiple people to work on it. You know, it takes a certain amount of time to do development work. Like even though the costs are low on the equipment side of it, if you want to market it at all, if you want to go to these events, if you want to hire people to do the work for you, like, you know, there's this idea that like, oh, well, I'll just learn how to make music or I'll just learn how to do the art, you know, which a very small segment of people can do this stuff. But in reality, the time cost of you taking on this work yourself is actually would be cheaper if you just would pay another person who's actually good at it to do the work and pay them a real wage. You know, I also really don't like seeing people getting paid way less than what their value is. Like my financial background, like I grew up relatively poor. Like I said, we had bootstrapped the company. You know, I've struggled financially for a very long time. And so the idea that like, you know, people don't deserve to be paid what they should be paid, or that they don't deserve to live in a certain like level of comfort because they're doing something that is like quote unquote fun, you know, or like making a game, which is like some sort of like exciting, you know, creative field, I think is really like, it's unfair. And I think it sets an expectation that's not really good for like the industry overall. And then it also sets up like this really unrealistic like fan expectation that games are just these things that just kind of like pop up out of nowhere and don't really cost anything to make, which is not totally true most of the time.
Do you think it's our duty to inform fans or gamers, the costs and the work that goes into game development? Like, is it our duty to tell them all this stuff?
I don't know. I kind of go back and forth on this. I think that it's like in some ways, yes, but then in other ways, like you can't just go running around yelling at people and being like, hey, did you know that video games cost a lot of money to make? I think that having like more nuanced conversations about it and being honest about development cycles and times and true cost of games. And I do see that slowly happening. Like what I'm saying is kind of less prevalent now than when it was when I had first started out, because I think that the indie development game community in general has really matured, over the last like 6 or 10 years or so, where, people are on their second or third game, or studios are kind of like being more sustainable, and there's more opportunities for funding, and there's more people that understand that it is technically a business when you get down to it. Not that you can't have a creative artistic side of it, which is the same in any kind of industry, but the people who make them still need to exist and live in some way. So I think that it's going to be like a slow and steady conversation, and less of like, just you have to run around and tell everybody that these are true costs of games, because that could also put you at odds with your fan base at the same time, because you don't want to sound ungrateful for a situation that you're in, or, that you're not enjoying the work that you're doing. But I think being realistic about it is something that I would encourage more people to talk honestly about it. But it also makes it hard, because when you're marketing a game or you're marketing anything, you don't want to like go in and be like, hey, this is really hard. Like you want everything to sound great. Like you're like, I'm great. The game's great. Everything's great. Buy my great game. It's not, I don't know. There's a time and a place, I guess, for those kinds of discussions, but I hope that we can like all kind of move that way, and that fans, especially too, as like a fan base is expanded for games, more and more people playing games all the time, and technology becoming more commonplace, and people getting more used to really truly understanding how games are made. I think will just hopefully happen as like a sea change, over time. Yeah,
we're here. We're spreading the message that so that's good. Oh, what have you changed your mind about in the last few years, and why?
I would say curation, actually. When we very first started off the Megabooth, it was essentially like referral based. And at some point it was just like pretty much like anybody that had a game that got recommended or that submitted that their game functioned, and seemed okay and was of some like basic quality level. Because initially we were just like, what are the indie games that are out there? How big is this community? How do we get the concept of what these games are into a larger consumer audience? And then at some point it was like overwhelming. We had the same problem that basically like every platform has, where, at first they're kind of just like small, and it's just, like through word of mouth or friends of friends. And then at some point it's, people start to become successful or starts to get noticed, and then the floodgates open. And so for a while I was like really kind of like hesitant about our role as curating games. And I think as we've gone on, that's actually become what we're known for and what our strength is. And I think that it's now I've kind of swung wholly the other way, where I really don't think it's possible for like, totally open platforms to be sustainable for developers in a lot of ways, because they get totally like swamped by just the volume of content, and consumers do as well too. And I don't think that things like that can be curated by AI or robots or, whatever. I really truly think that it's something that people just have an eye for it, and they have a sense for it, and they have a like intuition and a feeling in a way that is not really going to be automated or not be able to be automated. So I'd say curation for sure is kind of my total 180 over the last 6 years. Yeah.
How do you see it changing in the future?
Well, I don't know. I mean, a lot of the work that I said, like, we're going to be doing over the next year or so is related to that. Discoverability issues have been a problem for independent developers for a while now. I think that, I don't know. I mean, Steam has tried to solve it with kind of like having curators and having it automated in some ways. I mean, Apple still features games, but then, it doesn't really like kind of get the same attention as it used to when the features were smaller. I guess I have some ideas on it, but I'm also kind of like, I guess we'll be announcing some of that stuff later. But right now it's like, I really think it's just going to take time and effort from people that are good at it. And I also think that like curators being recognized and paid for their efforts is another thing. I'm talking about like paying what your worth is. Like we don't make money from developers right now. Like we charge $250 shared fee and you can donate on top of that and that's it. And we exist off of sponsorship and getting paid to do curation work, which we are asked to do a lot. But then very rarely, often ever offered to be paid for it is kind of like a frustrating thing where it's like, it's really needed in a lot of ways so that consumers can find the content that they want. And, people want us at shows or they want us to help out with their platform or, they want to do all these things to like get the quality content there, but they don't really like appreciate the fact that there's actually a ton of effort that goes into curating content and goes into being able to find and identify this stuff. And not even that, but just also to build up the community of people who are going to send quality content to you.
Wow. Whoa. Yeah, that's a lot right there. Yeah.
Yeah.
All the best on that, Kelly. Yeah, you sound like you got something worked up and I hope that it really works. And I'll be there to support you. So awesome on that. Now, you're more experienced, you're more better now. Like, what do you think was one of the best investments you've ever made? And it can be investment of money, time, or energy. Or was that a great investment?
I would actually say like starting a company, like actually taking the step to quit my day job and actually investing in starting up the Megabooth as a company. Like the first 6 months or so, I had used some money that I had saved up when I was still working. I had taken some freelance work to help to cover my bills. And I just made a go for it. And I worked super, super hard. And there were tons of people who helped to donate their time and their effort and their energy and advisors and just all these really great people along the ways that I had built up relationships with before I had started the company. And I think that taking that step, doing that work and really just like making a go for it and making it happen was probably the best investment that I've made overall, was just taking that step.
Yeah, taking that action. Yeah, it's a big risk, but you just never know until you try. And that's the thing that is kind of, I guess, scary to do. Like you just never know what's going to happen.
Well, and the kind of funny part when I was saying like with the mega show and like my fear of kind of inaction of moving the company forward is when I first started up the mega booth, I really didn't understand what I was getting myself into, because I came from a different industry and because I kind of wasn't as personally invested in it. I didn't really have as much at stake in the industry. It was kind of easy to just be like, I'll just run this thing and it'll be great. And we'll get all these cool people to be a part of it. And I think that if I had kind of really truly understood what it was going to turn into in the long run, I would have been a lot more afraid to take that step then. And so I think that that's kind of what's been actually scarier now. Like I almost, in some ways it was like the ignorance is bliss, it made everything a little easier.
And now it's getting bigger and bigger, right? So like, So the indie game's getting bigger. The game industry is actually booming and stuff with the AR and VR on the rise. Like, what are you most excited about today?
I really find I find VR exciting in a lot of ways. Like, I just find it exciting from a kind of like childhood standpoint, like the fact that we've like progressed technologically as a species, that virtual reality is like an actual thing that you can just buy and do now, to me is still kind of like blowing my mind a bit.
Yeah.
The other thing I'm actually kind of excited about, and this is, I guess, a little less apparent, is I really like the kind of like resurgence, and VR is a little included in this, like the resurgence of like alt control games and like arcade cabinets and this kind of idea of like people like physically wanting to connect with games and physically wanting to connect with each other like at gaming events. I think it's something like, not only have indie games grown, but like gaming conventions has grown and like conventions of all kinds of things have grown. Like I feel like there's like a convention for everything, the same way that there's like a music festival or a music show or something that you can go to. And I think with people living their lives, a lot online or on their phones, it's like, it's really nice to just be around people, and to like physically be interacting with the games and to like, go up to an arcade cabinet or to play a kind of weird alt hardware game And that's sort of the vibe that we've been really going with the Mega Show. And the thing that I feel really excited about is seeing people like come out and enjoy video games in a way that reminds me of what my childhood was like. Like I used to go to arcades all the time, and that was like super common, and they were in every single mall when malls were also still a thing. And they were like arcade cabinets at restaurants and all these kinds of like funny toys and weird things, like when, early like, pre Nintendo or even around Nintendo age, where there's just tons of like strange consoles and weird apparatuses coming out for it. And it felt very like, I don't know, it felt very kind of like expansive and creative and interesting. And I really think that there's kind of a leaning back towards that in some ways. And I kind of feel like VR in some ways is only going to be possible for a certain, part of the world and part of the community if you have it in a kind of arcade style situation. And I think it also kind of does well in groups of people, and it's fun that way. So I don't know, I'm kind of excited about that part as well. Like I don't know, going back to reality.
Do you think the Switch helped contribute to that?
I mean, Nintendo always is really good with that sort of stuff.
Yeah.
Like they're just so like, yeah, like I know the Wii U didn't do super well, but when I was in college, I was working at a video game store, and it was around the time like the Wii was first launching, and like it was seriously felt like a revolution. Like I was used to people coming in and like buying World of Warcraft credit when you went to the stores to buy World of Warcraft credit, and like it's not like it's like the core gamers, like the gamers, and then all of a sudden, like with the Wii, it's like you see families coming in and kids excited to like play a bowling game with their parents, which like, how many times are kids excited to do things with their parents, or like getting their friends together. Pokemon Go was another one that was kind of like that. Like I was in Japan around the time for BitSummit when that came out, and like literally like everybody was just walking around with it and like talking to each other and joking, and like even through like language barriers, like we're showing each other our phones and like joking about like finding the Pokemon and stuff. And like, I don't know, I just find that really like, I mean, I know Nintendo didn't make that, but you know what I mean? Like, it's like that vibe of those kinds of like games where it brings community and families and stuff together, I just think is really great. And like the Switch to me feels like the same way. Like so many people are talking about it, families are talking about it, kids are talking about it. And I find that I find that very energizing.
Yeah, I feel like some of my best memories are just playing games with my friends and family. Like I still consider it some of the best memories I ever had.
Yeah, same here. And like, I mean, I think there's a lot of indie developers who focus on making local multiplayer co-op games because they have that feeling and that nostalgia. And like, unfortunately, it's kind of tough for small developers to get the audience that they need around that sort of stuff. But like the concept of it is there. It's the nostalgia. It's the memories of like having fun with your friends. Like, when you look back, like, are your memories going to be of just like sitting and staring at a screen and playing the game, or is it like the people around you and like the moments in your life that it kind of like touched at the same time? And yeah, I think that's stuff that like Nintendo does very well with. Yeah,
I love local co-op. Can't go wrong with that. What is that one game that influenced you the most and why?
SimCity. Yeah, I play like there's actually I was on another podcast, I think it was called Final Games, where it's like the 8 games that would take on with you to a deserted island, and mine are basically all management simulation games. So if you want to hear me talk for like 2 hours about management sims, you should go listen to that podcast. But SimCity for me was like, first off, we were allowed to play it when I was younger. We had it on like an actual computer. So I've been around computers for most of my life, like even earlier than kind of general population had access to a lot of that kind of technology. And SimCity was like, man, I would just play it for hours and hours. And then there was like Theme Park. And man, once The Sims came out, I mean, that's another one is like The Sims. I still play a ton of it. But I just really love, like creating systems building, city building, anything with the word sim in it. I just think it's like, I don't know, it's kind of like a logic puzzle for me in some ways. And it really like, it's something that to me is almost like meditative, like if I'm feeling like stressed out or, I'm feeling like I really want to like have some sort of creative outlet. I can just sit and kind of like play around with these things and build something and create something in a way that doesn't feel stressful. Like there's no timer on it. I'm not having to like, shoot a thing or like make it to a certain point in the game by a certain like amount of time or anything like that, which to me just like makes me feel super stressed and like my heart rate starts going. Yeah, but it's something that I can more like sit down and like really think through and feel calm and kind of like, yeah, meditate on it a little bit. Like I had read something about when you do things like cooking or cleaning or organizing or something, it's basically occupying enough of your brain space that you know your kind of subconscious isn't going as crazy as it normally does, but it doesn't occupy so much of it that it tips over into feeling stressed. And so I think games like SimCity to me were something that like really gave me this like space and this opportunity to just kind of like calm down and like think and like play through something, but also like creatively express myself at the same time.
Would you play a game like that in a VR?
Yeah, man, I think it would work super well in VR. I think it would work well on like iPad and stuff too, like anything touch. Because like most of the annoying things about those games are like figuring out the menus and the controls.
Yeah.
And like if you could just like plop down cities and build things, like there's so many times I would love to just like reach my hand into the city and like just move something or just fix it or poke a person or whatever.
Just streamline it. Yeah, streamline the game. Yeah. Why do you love being part of the video game industry?
I really love the people. I think one of the things that really drew me towards independent games, especially, was when I worked at MIT, a lot of the students that I worked with were like super creative and entrepreneurial and like really smart and just really nice and really motivated and really wanting to like kind of do something different. And a lot of times too, they had kind of like fallen out of other, like there's a lot of like cool subcultures at MIT, and there's a lot of like interesting kind of like, I don't know, creativity, I guess, bubbling underneath the kind of smart technological side of stuff. And for me, that's what indie developers feel like, you know, like people come from all over the world and all walks of life and all kinds of different stuff. Like, you know, people that were musicians or people that were physicists or people that were artists or, you know, all these things. And then they like learn how to program or they like get interested in technology and somewhere along the way. And they kind of like never really fully fit in the music scene, or they never fully fit into like straight up like computer science and like hardcore like software engineering kind of stuff. And so they all kind of like end up in this like mixture between all these things. And it's a little like kind of like bohemian, you know, where people are just like traveling around and doing these things and making creative stuff and expressing themselves and just like playing around with the world in a way that I don't think, you know, the average person kind of expresses themselves in that way. So I would say it's like pretty much all the people and somewhat the games, obviously, but
I swear that's like a common thing. Like a lot of my guests just says it's the people, like the people of the game industry is what keeps them there. Even though there's like crunch time and the hard times, it's the people that just keeps them there. So that's so awesome to hear.
Yeah. Yeah. The community is super amazing and really welcoming, and just, I can't say enough good things about the people that I've met and worked with like over the course of my time in the games industry.
Awesome. Before we go into the lightning round, Game Devs, don't forget to check my website, GameDevLoadout.com, for all the show notes and everything that we just talked about. You can type in the number 91 in the search bar to find Kelly's episode. And now, Kelly, are you ready to crush the lightning round?
Yes.
What was holding you back from joining the game industry?
Fear.
What's a personal habit that contributes to your success?
Stubbornness.
What's the best piece of advice you've ever received?
Don't base your business model off people who have no money. Base your business model off people who have money, who have a vested interest in people without money succeeding.
Oh, do you have like a personal experience with that?
That was actually the best piece of business advice that I got when I was first starting the company. I talked to tons and tons of people, and one of my advisors told me that, and it just clicked, and that's pretty much how we've been running the company since.
So essentially, just listen to someone that has done it before or has experience.
Yeah. Ask advice. Ask lots of questions. Ask a million questions.
How has a failure set you up for later success?
I would say that it gave me the ability to clearly see what was going on, and I mean that in the sense of like having realistic expectations, really understanding what I'm truly capable of, and taking that and learning from it. Like you learn way more from failing than you learn from succeeding in a lot of ways. Even though failure can be very, very scary, I think that it's worth doing it.
What's a great marketing tip to make yourself and your game stand out?
I would say, honestly, to network. I know it's not like a straight up kind of marketing thing, but I think networking is very, very important. And also maybe more on the marketing side is learning how to talk about your game in a very succinct way.
Yeah, like you mentioned earlier, you practice first before you go big. What resources should we use to get started today, along, of course, with your website?
Yeah, so I mean, obviously, Indie Megabooth website. I would say like listening to podcasts, reading articles, asking lots and lots of questions. Like I was saying, your local game developer meetups, like a local IGDA chapter, or if there's not one in your area, you know, finding maybe like a subreddit or an online community where you can go and ask questions and find help and find support. It's really, really, truly not something that you should be doing on your own or feel like you need to do on your own. There's tons of resources and there's lots and lots of people who want to help you be successful and want to see your awesome games be made.
Yes, we are here to help you, Game Dev. So hit us up for sure. This next question is a bit of a doozy, so take your time if you need to. Imagine you woke up the next morning in a brand new world and you knew no one. You still have all the experience and knowledge you currently have today. Your food and shelter is taken care of and you have a laptop. What would you do step by step on the path to join and become successful in the game industry?
Ooh. Yeah, I guess like I was saying, my advice from before is to like find a community, like find where are the people who are also making games? What are the games like? You know, what were their challenges? What helped them become successful? Yeah, find a mentor. That would be the first thing that I would do with the computer. So get online, search for if anybody else is making video games. If they are, where are they? How can I get to talk to them? How can I meet them? Yeah, and then I guess you have to download some software.
Yeah,
the game.
Take action. That's the first thing you got to do. Take action to go out there. We have reached the end. Thank you so much, Kelly. So go ahead and give us one last parting piece of guidance and how we can connect with you, and then we'll say goodbye.
Yeah, so you can get us on Twitter. So we're at IndieMEGABOOth. I'm personally at Kelly Wallick, although I'm very shy on social media, so I'm not there as often. If you want to email, we're contact@IndieMEGABOOth.com. We also have an Instagram. We're on Facebook. We're at shows. We are all over the place and we're very friendly people. So come and find us and say hi. And yeah, thank you so much for having me on. And thanks everyone for listening to my super rambly long answers on all these questions. So hope it was helpful and hope you enjoyed it.
Give us one last parting piece of guidance. So something that you just want us to leave us with.
Don't be afraid to make a difference and don't be afraid to be yourself.
Ooh, I like that. Awesome. Kelly, it's been a pleasure. Thank you so much for sharing your journey with us. For that, we are truly grateful and we'll catch you next time.
Yeah, thank you.
Thank you, Game Devs, for listening. I hope we brought you value today. Equip yourself with the best loadout and take action. If you haven't already, subscribe to the podcast with iTunes or Castbox to listen to more inspiring stories and gain valuable knowledge. I greatly appreciate it if you share the show with your fellow peers so that they can also be motivated. Until then, I'm your host, Tony Chan, and I'll catch you next Wednesday on the Game Dev Loadout podcast. Peace.